Not a falsehood.
We moved 7,500 troops off of the X based on the intel.
Stop.
Based on the intel.
Stop. Reclaiming my time.
Because you yell doesn't make you right. Just because you yell doesn't make you right.
I'm reclaiming my time on behalf of these survivors. You just said what they said is a falsehood.
There's a much larger picture.
True?
There's a much larger picture at play here that included integrated air defenses, bunkers, moving people off the X
Mr. Secretary,
to ensure that they were not part of the target. We moved those troops and all across the theater.
Congressman Patrick Ryan walked into that hearing as a combat veteran with 2 Bronze Stars, and he did not come to score political points or generate a clip for social media, but came because 6 American soldiers are dead, and the man sitting across from him went to a Pentagon podium the day after they were killed and told the country something that the soldiers who survived that attack are now calling a lie. And the gap between what Hegseth said publicly about what happened at Port Schwebe and what the people who were actually there are describing is not a matter of interpretation or perspective, but is a factual contradiction that Ryan was not willing to let sit in the record without being addressed directly and on the official congressional transcript. And make sure to subscribe so you never miss a video and watch this.
Gentleman yields back. Chair, and I recognize the gentleman from New York, Mr. Ryan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Head wounds, heavy bleeding, and then just shrapnel all over. So folks are bleeding from their abdomen, bleeding from arms, bleeding from legs. Secretary Hegseth, do you know who said that?
I'm not sure I do.
It was one of our soldiers describing the devastating Iranian drone strike at Port Schwebe, March 1st in Kuwait. As you know, 6 of our soldiers killed, over 30 wounded. Secretary, do you know the range of the Shahed 136 one-way attack drone, approximately?
It depends on the variant, but it's got serious distance.
Several hundred miles. Do you know how far Port Schwebe is from Iran?
There's a reason why we took extreme measures for force protection, because we understood the proximity challenges.
Mr. Chair, I'm going to reclaim my time. It's well under 100 miles. Before the war started, there was clear intelligence that Schwebe was high on Iran's target list. Internal analysis had said the site was indefensible from aerial attack and should not be used. Yet you sent our soldiers from the 103rd Sustainment Command there anyway. Is that true or false? True or false? Straightforward question.
Are you going to give me a chance to answer or just play gotcha?
Did you send them there or not?
We took proactive measures from the beginning to ensure force protection and defensive posture were maximized across the theater.
Let's talk about what defenses they had. Prior to the attack, officers on the ground knew our troops were vulnerable. In fact, they requested additional force protection. Did they receive it?
Wherever humanly possible, force protection and counter UAS was always made available.
They did not. In fact, when asked to describe the base's defense, one survivor who's come forward from the unit said, quote, I would put it in the none category. From a drone defense capability, none. So let's be clear, no counter-drone capabilities, no counter-rocket systems, no counter-mortar or counter-artillery, not even the basic overhead protection that you and I had 20 years ago in Iraq, and now 6 of our soldiers are dead. The next day, you downplayed the attack. You said it was a squirter that squeaked through fortified defenses. But since then, thankfully, brave survivors have come forward to set the record straight. One of our surviving soldiers told CBS, quote, painting a picture that one squeaked through is a falsehood. Another said the unit was, quote, unprepared to provide any defense for itself. It was not a fortified position. Another survivor said the building's protection was about as weak as one gets. Secretary Hegseth, that is obviously in direct contradiction to what you said from the Pentagon podium the next day. So are you saying that these soldiers, our soldiers who survived this horrific attack, are lying?
What I'm saying is before the commencement of the conflict, we put in maximum defensive posture we could.
That's a direct contradiction.
We moved 70
what they said,
in this directing. Can I speak, or are you just going to monologue falsehoods all over the place?
It's not a falsehood.
We moved 7,500 troops off of the X based on the intel.
Stop.
Based on the intel.
Stop. reclaiming my time.
Because you yell doesn't make you right. Just because you yell doesn't make you right.
I'm reclaiming my time on behalf of these survivors. You just said what they said is a falsehood.
There's a much larger picture. There's a much larger picture at play here that included integrated air defenses, bunkers, moving people off the X to ensure that they were not part of the target. We moved those troops and all across the theater, thousands of troops off the X, off of their bases, because we knew what Iran was going to try to strike, and we knew there could be a tragic moment. There could be a tragic moment where something could get through. Of course, that's the consequence of conflict, and we remember those 6 every single day.
I want to finish.
But don't play games with.
I'm not playing games. I want to finish with one more quote from a survivor of the attack, and I put this on the record. Telling the truth is important, and we're not going to learn from these mistakes if we pretend these mistakes didn't happen. Secretary Hegseth, those soldiers told the truth. Those soldiers are braver than you are.
I commend them.
They are asking for accountability. They deserve accountability. And I'm asking for the same, starting with you. And as I said a year ago, you need to resign immediately.
I commend those soldiers.
I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Texas.
Ryan started by doing something that immediately established the moral authority he was going to bring to the rest of the exchange, which was to read out loud the specific wounds that soldiers suffered in the attack at Port Shueba in Kuwait on March 1st. And he read them slowly and clearly so that every person in that hearing room and every person watching had to actually sit with what those words mean when you say them about real human beings. Head wounds, heavy bleeding, shrapnel torn through abdomens and arms and legs. And then he asked Hegseth whether he knew who had described those injuries in those terms, and Hegseth said he was not sure. And Ryan told him it was one of the soldiers who was there, one of the people who lived through what happened at that port, describing in their own words what the attack did to the people around them. And that framing of the exchange, starting not with a policy argument or a procedural question, but with the physical reality of what happened to American bodies in that location, set the tone for everything that followed in a way that made it very difficult for Hegseth to retreat into the usual abstractions about theater-wide force protection and comprehensive defensive posture. The first specific factual question Ryan asked was about the range of the Shahed 136 drone, because that is where the accountability for what happened at Port Shueba begins. And the answer to that question is the foundation of everything else Ryan was going to build on top of it. And Hegseth acknowledged that the drone flies several hundred miles, and Ryan asked how far Port Shueba is from Iran. And Hegseth started talking about extreme measures and proximity challenges, and the complexity of defensive operations across a large theater. And Ryan reclaimed his time and gave the answer himself, which is that Port Shueba is well under 100 miles from Iran, meaning it sits well within easy range of exactly the kind of drone that was used to kill 6 American soldiers there. And before the first shot of this war was ever fired, United States intelligence had already identified that site as high on Iran's target list, and internal military analysis had concluded that the location presented serious defensive challenges against aerial attack, and that the recommendation coming out of that analysis was to avoid using it as a staging area for American forces. And Ryan asked Hegseth directly whether he sent soldiers from the 103rd Sustainment Command there anyway, and Hegseth talked about maximizing force protection and defensive posture across the theater, which is not a yes or a no, but is the kind of answer you give when the honest answer is yes, and you know that saying yes creates a problem you cannot talk your way out of. Ryan then asked what defenses those soldiers actually had available to them at that location. And this is where the testimony from survivors becomes impossible for Hegseth to reconcile with his public statements, because officers on the ground at Port Shueba had identified the defensive vulnerabilities at that site and had made formal requests for additional protective capabilities before the attack occurred. And Ryan asked whether those requests were fulfilled, and Hegseth said force protection was always made available wherever humanly possible across the entire theater. And Ryan put a survivor's own words into the official record to answer that claim. And what that survivor said when asked to describe the defensive capability available at Port Shueba was 2 words: none category. And Ryan repeated that slowly and clearly for the record: none category, meaning no counter-drone systems, no counter-rocket systems, no counter-mortar systems, not even the basic overhead cover protection that soldiers deployed in Iraq had available to them more than 20 years ago when the military was still learning how to protect forward operating positions in a hostile environment. And the contrast between Hegseth's language about maximizing force protection and the survivor's 2-word description of what was actually there is not a difference of emphasis or a difference of interpretation, but is a direct factual contradiction that one of them is wrong about, and Ryan was making clear which one he believed. The moment that the hearing is going to be remembered for came when Ryan brought up what Hegseth did the very next day after 6 American soldiers were killed. Because Hegseth went to the Pentagon podium and stood in front of cameras and told the country and told the families of the people who died that the attack was carried out by what he called a squirter that somehow squeaked through fortified defenses. And Ryan read back what the soldiers who survived that attack actually said in response to that description. And one called it a falsehood, and another said the unit was unprepared to provide any defense for itself and that it was not a fortified position by any definition of that word. And a third said the building's protection was about as weak as one gets in a military deployment. And then Ryan asked Hegseth the question that had no comfortable answer. Are you saying that these soldiers are soldiers who survived this horrific attack and who came home with the physical and psychological damage of what happened to them? Are you saying that they are lying? And Hegseth said that before the start of the conflict, they had put in maximum defensive posture. And Ryan said they called it the none category. And Hegseth said he should be allowed to speak. And Ryan said he was not going to sit there and listen to false statements about what happened to American soldiers. And Hegseth raised his voice, and Ryan looked directly at him and delivered the line that cuts through everything. Just because you yell does not make you right. And he kept his own voice completely steady and completely controlled. And that steadiness, in contrast to Hegseth's raised voice, was itself a statement about who in that room had the moral authority to speak about what happened at that port. Hegseth tried to escape into the broader strategic picture and talked about moving 7,500 troops off the X based on intelligence and an integrated air defense system across the theater. And Ryan was done with the broader strategic picture and put one more survivor's voice into the official record. And that survivor said, "Telling the truth is important, and we are not going to learn from these mistakes if we pretend the mistakes did not happen." And that sentence from someone who was at Port Schweba and who survived what happened there and who came home changed by it is the most important thing said in that entire exchange. And Ryan built his closing directly on top of it and said those soldiers told the truth. Those soldiers have more courage than the man sitting across from him. Those soldiers are asking for accountability, and the families of the 6 who did not come home are asking for accountability. And Ryan was asking for accountability, starting with Hegseth. Personally, and then he said the thing that is going to follow Hegseth for as long as he holds this job: you need to resign immediately. And he yielded back. Congressman Keating added a dimension to the hearing that extended the accountability conversation beyond Port Schweba and into the maritime operations that have been taking place as part of the broader campaign. Because he walked through the story of an Ecuadorian fishing boat operating about 200 nautical miles from the Galapagos Islands that was struck by American forces, not once, but twice, with no warning shot fired before either strike. And the survivors of that attack were handcuffed at gunpoint and had black hoods placed over their heads, and their personal devices were seized and wiped, and they were held for days before being released, because there was never any evidence of narco activity found on the vessel or among the crew. And the Defense Department released the first video of the initial strike to the public and to major news networks, and has refused to release the follow-up video showing what happened to the people who were in the water after the second strike hit a vessel that was already sinking with survivors still aboard, and Keating said he had been given classified information about the justification for that second strike, and that he could not discuss the classified details, but described what he had been told as the most convoluted justification he had ever heard in his life, and said it should be made public, because it is a question about American honor, and about what American forces are doing, and what the rules governing those actions actually are. The thread that connects every part of this hearing, from Ryan's opening recitation of wounds to Keating's account of the fishing boat, is the same thread, which is the question of whether the people making decisions about when and where to use American military force are being honest about what those decisions have produced, and whether there is any genuine accountability when those decisions result in American soldiers dying in locations they were told were protected when they were not, or foreign civilians being killed in circumstances that the official justifications cannot adequately explain. And Ryan's demand that Hegseth resign was not theater or political performance, but was the conclusion that a combat veteran reached after listening to the testimony and looking at the evidence and deciding that the person responsible for those decisions and for the false public statements about those decisions is not someone who should continue to hold the office he currently holds. Drop a comment and tell me what you think. Do the soldiers who survived Port Schwebe and the families of the 6 who did not ever get the real accountability they are asking for? Or does the protection from the top of this administration absorb everything that comes out of hearings like this one without any consequence that matters? Hit the like button, subscribe, and ring the bell because we are covering every single development as it comes. See you in the next one. Stay safe.